hi to everyone who is on the webcast. We are just going to wait a couple minutes and see if we can get a couple more people into the room. Thanks so much.
Can you hear me? Okay, hello everybody. That's loud. So let's turn this off. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. We have a really small in-person participant list here, but I'm sure we have a lot of folks out in the internet that are logging in and watching. So this is the second fee listening session with respect to ELAP's fees. And this is going to be a very short presentation. We have about 12, I think, slides, not that many. But first of all, I wanted to introduce the team and tell you what we're going to be looking ahead for this fee listening session. So if you could put it on the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the agenda for today is that I want to introduce our fee team, and then the fee unit will have a presentation, and then ELAP will also have a presentation, and then we are open to any ideas and thoughts you all have on ELAP's fees. So I am Christine Sotelo, the Chief of California ELAP, so I'm part of the team. We also have Kate McCarthy, who is our administrative lead in ELAP. She's helping out with the team, as well as Ryan Wilson. You'll meet him. He has a presentation today, and also Marianne Kozravafard, who is our senior ES supervisor in ELAP. So without further delay, I think I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to talk about the condition of ELAP's fund.
Okay, is my mic working? So what we have here is our fund condition for ELAP for 16-17, and our fee revenue that we have projected there is the amount of revenue that we are projecting to bring in given the recent increase to the ELAP fees as well as the current number of labs and FOTs that we have. And the number below that, the $3,347,000, is our expenditure authority that is in the Budget Act, and that's the amount of money that ELAP would spend if all positions were filled and the program were being fully funded. And so as you can see, we have a shortfall there of about $623,000. We set fees for 16-17 based on what we projected we would have to bring in to cover our positions that we currently have filled. We worked with our budget office, and that's where we came up with the roughly $2.7 million. And when we had some previous stakeholder meetings, we discussed that, in the future, once ELAP is fully staffed, that we would probably have to increase the fees. Roughly 25% is what we projected at the time. We also typically have, most funds within the state have what's called a fund reserve for economic uncertainties, and generally that's targeted somewhere between 5 and 10%. ELAP being somewhat of a small program, we would probably push it closer to 10%, because even at 10%, that would only be a reserve of about $300,000. On this slide, I'll talk about the state budget process. Most of our fee programs here at the Water Board, we have stakeholder meetings that coincide with these points in time with the budget process. And in January, the governor's proposed budget comes out, and then there's a revision that's done in May. As some of you may know, most of the state's revenue comes in, closer to April on the tax deadline. So they, will do a revision after those numbers become a little more clear, and adjustments and changes can happen in there with finance letters. And then the budget actually gets enacted July 1. So changes can happen anywhere in between those points in time. And typically we have a couple stakeholder meetings with most of our programs to inform stakeholders of what the projections are at the time and what we think it would mean for fees. ELAP recently received emergency regulatory authority to set fees. Previously, the adjustment that we just did recently actually was through what's called the file and print process. And the file and print process allowed us to make changes to the actual base fee and FOT for ELAP. However, it's come to our attention through stakeholder meetings as well as staff analysis that the current fee structure isn't necessarily very meaningful, and there's been expression that from both stakeholders and staff here at the Water Board that we'd like to change that, and the file and print process would not allow us to make wholesale changes to the actual fee structure. It only allow us to adjust the FOT and base amounts in accordance with the Budget Act. So now we have emergency regulatory authority, which will allow us, once we have come up with a viable solution for ELAP fees going forward, to work at changing the regulations to incorporate the new fee structure. Other programs here at the Water Board that have emergency regulatory authority are water rights, water quality, and beginning in fiscal year 2017-18, our drinking water program as well. And the emergency process is a lot more streamlined than the regular rulemaking process, which is more fitting for fees because they have to be set on an annual basis and they have to be adjusted roughly quickly with the changes that happen in the Budget Act. And the regular rulemaking process takes up to a year from the time that it's actually filed with OAL, and up until you actually file your notice of rulemaking, there's a lot of other tasks that have to be done. And given the changes that it would have been needed to make for ELAP, it probably would have been close to a 2-year-long process, whereas our emergency regulatory process, once we have come up with a new fee structure, the emergency regulatory process takes about 15 days from start to finish from the point at which it's filed. That is about all that I have on the budget process and the fees. I'll turn it back over to Christine. You had a question?
Regulation process in the state. Sorry.
So Ryan, this process we're going through today, or starting to go through today, it's not under emergency regulation process, but the normal state budget process that may take 2 years?
No, there's a couple of rulemaking processes at OAL. There's the regular rulemaking process, which is the lengthy one that I mentioned, that given all the tasks that we have to complete could take close to 2 years. And that would include, working with stakeholders in different meetings and talking about options and things like that. And then the emergency rulemaking process is what we have now, and finance has given us that authority. And so once we have worked with you guys to come up with a new fee structure, and once we have that all put together in a package and we send it over to OAL, the process is about 15 days. So that's the end of the process. So after we've vetted out which options we want to go with and what the structure is going to look like, and after attorneys have drafted the regulation text that has to go along with that, there's all sorts of internal documents that have to be prepared and memos, and there's a Form 399 and a notice of proposed rulemaking and different things that are included in the handout that we provided. And so once we have all those documents prepared and we actually file it with OAL, we have to post it publicly for 5 days ahead of time, and then once the review process starts, they have 10 days to review it and then file it with the Secretary of State, and then it becomes law.
Follow-up question. The most recent fee increase that we just went through is an example of emergency regulation process.
It's actually the file and print process is what ELAP had before, and the way that worked is the Health and Safety Code, there was a section in there that said ELAP fees would be adjusted annually in accordance with the Budget Act, which is that number that Finance comes up with from the previous slide of the $3.347 million. And the process that was used then is since the Budget Act determines what that number is, it's called file and print, and it's even more streamlined than the emergency regulation process, and it's really only changing the number. You can't change the structure of that regulation through that process, and that is how we adjusted the fee through that. You still fill out a Form 400 and some of the similar paperwork, but it's a lot less involved, but then it also limits you on what you can actually
Trying to wrap my head about how much time do we have, the stakeholder community, how much time do we have with you before a decision is made?
So I think some of the slides they're going to talk about are going to include that, but typically here at the State Board, we bring fee changes before the board in September because of the budget getting enacted in July and other operational things that happen in between there. September is when we typically like to bring the fees before the board, and obviously, I think the goal is to come up with something by that point in time, because we know that we have to increase fees a little bit more in order to cover the program costs. And rather than adjust the FOT and the base fee again, which is not what we've heard the lab community wants, we would need to get the structure changed so that we can bring in the revenue that we need to make the program whole. So as long as we're able to do that within that time frame, typically we bring it before the board in September, and I don't know how much wiggle room there is there, but
yeah, there's going to be a substantial amount of time. It's February. We're not going to take it to the board until September. So, I failed to mention this is really the beginning of the conversation with all of you. So it's just giving you some ideas of, where we see the problems are, and I'll go through it in my presentation, and ideas we might have, and ideas we've taken from other states and from even our listening session we had last week. Just give it to you so that you all can think about and listen to ideas so that we can go back to the drawing board and give you some real solid examples of what we might be going with. But there's going to be conversation back and forth on what works, what doesn't work. And I'll go into that detail in my presentation.
unless there's any other questions for me at this point in time, I'll be sticking around, so if anything else comes up, I can answer your questions. I'll turn it back over to Christine.
Okay. So as I said before, this is really the beginning of the conversation on building a sustainable, effective fee for ELAP. But before we, talk about what the criteria is, I kind of wanted to tell you what we see as the problems that we've identified in ELAP. So our fees currently have an administration fee and then a per field of testing fee. So the methods, for every matrix, whether it be wastewater, hazardous waste, drinking water, you pay for each of those field of testing, and there's maybe hundreds of methods within that field of testing. But the problems that we've identified is that it's difficult to amend our structure because it's written into regulations. So we know that we need to rewrite the regulations. That's what we're doing right now, and you just heard that there are really three main types that we've exercised here in ELAP. And it's out of date. It hasn't been changed since 2005. So we're long overdue for some rewriting of our fees. We also have issues with rolling invoices. Every month, my staff scrambles every month, and so does Ryan's staff to issue notices or invoices, courtesy invoices to laboratories, letting them know when their fee is due. And that's the anniversary of the ending of their certificate every 2 years. So we would like to stop this rolling invoice every month and stabilize it and have an annual invoice that comes out so it's easy to track and it's not as time consuming and ineffective for my staff and Ryan's staff. And then the FOT fees don't really correlate with the resources required to certify a lab. So for example, if you were to, Lab A were to want one method within drinking water, you would pay $452. If you were Lab B that wanted 10 or 20, you would pay the same amount. So it's really unfair. We're expending the resources to certify a lab, and we're not gaining the revenue that we need to support the program. So when we talk about sustainable fee structure, what do we mean? We mean that it's easily amended as the fiscal conditions change. So every year, you heard that we'll be engaging in this emergency regulations effort. So what we don't want is to have to go and talk about a massive fee structure change. It's something that we commend every year that stands the test of time, that we don't have to go back and make major structural changes. Maybe just adjust for the different issues that the program is facing fiscally, but no major structural changes. And then that it supports the program, as I mentioned earlier, that we assess the revenue and get the revenue that we should be receiving for the resources that we expend. And also, there's a lot of small labs in ELAP and a lot of large labs. A lot of the small labs have smaller fees and the large labs have larger fees. So we want it to be representative of the number of analysis certified. And we want it to be created collaboratively. So we're working together. So as I said before, this is the beginning of the conversation about the fees, and we have plenty of time to discuss what works and what doesn't work. And then, as Ryan mentioned, that it aligns with the other water board programs and how they assess their fees, water rights, water quality. Even the Division of Drinking Water is embarking in a more sustainable, effective fee.
Christina?
Yes.
Small labs have small fees, large labs have bigger fees. And that's based on the number of FOTs they have or the number of studies they do, or how are you doing that?
Well,
so the number of FOTs, right?
yeah.
Yeah, my question was, one of your points up there is small labs will have smaller fees and larger labs will have larger fees, and I guess that's based on the number of FOTs that they register for?
FOTs. I mean, it's naturally inherent that a smaller lab would have less FOTs than a larger lab.
Well,
right?
that may be true, but within the same FOT, there's, a big difference between, a commercial lab and discharger labs, which are doing some of their own work, and yet you guys might do 6 studies a year, and we do 100, and yet our fees are the same.
Yes. Yes, it's just a point that we've made that we've heard from the industry.
I guess my confusion is that
Okay, hi, Caitlin McCarthy. So I think one of the things that you're getting at is one of the points that we're concerned about in terms of the way that the fees play out right now. So a small lab could have, one method within an FOT, and a large lab could have 100 methods within a FOT, and the price would be that they would be paying the same price. So in terms of thinking about it structured as an FOT, that's one of the things we see as problematic. And Christine will go over some of the options that we've been talking about that do away with the FOT structure so that there is a more fair assessment of the analyses that a lab is running. So that's definitely a great point and something that we recognize as an issue moving forward
And we're
too.
going to talk about that later.
Yes,
in
yeah,
your
that's coming up.
presentation. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kate. All right, so we're going to put up some ideas and thoughts that we've heard from the industry. So one caveat is that these prices and numbers are possible scenarios, just simplified. So, we've rounded out the numbers to 100. You'll see in subsequent slide, there's actual numbers from what we've found from what other states charge. So just keep that in mind, that these are just ideas to get the juices flowing for you to come back to us and tell us, hey, I think that this might be something that we might consider. And remember, this is the beginning of the conversation, so let's just keep that in mind. All right, so what we've heard and what we've seen is possible structures would be the flat fee, where it's a flat fee per method and per analyte. So you have one standard price for any method or analyte. So example, $100 and each analyte $5. That's something that we pulled from previous ELAP draft regulations. It didn't make it in the next set of subsequent regulations, but we're just bringing these up just for everybody to refresh their memory so that we can get some fresh, ideas and maybe a spin on old ideas for this next discussion about fees. So flat fee per tier. So tiers identified based on the quantity of methods. So each tier has the same cost example. So if you have 1 through 10 methods, you pay this amount. You have 10 through 20, $100. And then if you have 25 methods, you pay $100 and so on. So you see, and you'll see in the subsequent slides that other states do this. And so this will give you just a snapshot of what we're thinking of. The next possible structure would be tiered. So it's tiered, progressive, regressive. Kate, do you want to explain that in more detail?
Love to, thanks. So a couple options with the tiered. Progressive means that as you move up in tiers, the price would increase. And regressive means that as you move up in tiers in terms of quantity of your methods, then the price would decrease for that tier at a set percentage, which we would figure out based on the amount of fees that we need to collect. Do you want me to take all of these ones?
Sure.
Okay. And the next option for tiered is a complexity-based tier, and that would be something that we would charge per method. So this would kind of get to doing away with the FOT grouping. And then each method would be assessed, and we would rank it would be ranked on the complexity of the analysis, and we would rank it low, medium, or high, and then each ranking would have a standard charge that would be assessed depending on what you applied for. And then the third option is complexity-based per FOT, and this is an example. Actually, we pulled this straight from the ELAP structure that was in place prior to us leaving the program. So I think the next slide actually is just a snippet of that. And the way that worked was that they ranked the entire FOT as low, medium, or high. And one of the issues that we see with this route is that within that FOT, there's a variation of complexity. So we're not exactly sure what determination was used to get those rankings. So that is kind of our preliminary thoughts on some tiered options. And we can take any questions about this if you have any.
So maybe to give you an idea of how other states use it, so we put this together. I know that the text is pretty small, but what we found out from these 6 states is that there's a variation of how other states implement their fees. So for example, Arizona has that 3-tier that we talked about earlier. So they have 3 levels. So 1 through 9, it's $16.77, 10 through 17, $21.30, and so on. They actually charge for a proficiency evaluation fee, which is $130. And then anytime you want to update your information on your certificate, they charge $126. And they do have the fee per method, which is, it ranges from $10 to $381. Obviously, the $381 is for more complex methods. Illinois, they have $2,400 for their administrative assessment fee, and then it's just a straight $1,000 for all the different matrix that you would apply for under your certificate. So they don't break it down. Nevada has a $500 application fee, and then it ranges from $200 to $1,500 based on the matrix. Oregon is very similar to Arizona in that it has different tiers, 1, 2, and 1 through 10, and then 11 through 25. But then they also include the FOT complexity that Kate was talking about earlier, which is what ELAP has implemented in the past when we were part of TNI, the low, medium, and high complexity. So, you know, you can take all of these ideas and combine them in any way. Pennsylvania, they have a straight application fee and matrix fee, and it ranges, those are the ranges. And then Utah has a lot of different things in their structure. They have application fee of $825, and then you pay more if it's out-of-state ELAP. They charge for rush certification processing, and then, as I said, ELAP recognition, which is the out-of-state fee. They have a discount on the volume of methods that you want to be certified for, and then they also charge for technologies. So if you have a GCMS or whatever type that you have, they charge you for that many that you have in your laboratory. So these are really the ideas and thoughts that we wanted to throw out to all of you. And remember, this is really not the end of this is the beginning of the conversation. This is not the end. We're going to be having more workshops as we move forward. So the next step for ELAP is to research, develop, and review the ideas that you all are giving us today. It could be through email. It could be calling me, even emailing us today. And we're doing that now. We're going to consult with LTAC, which we just announced the LTAC members today. So congratulations to all of them. And then we'll likely have this on the agenda for spring 2016. And definitely we'll have some conversations with LTAC because they're our advisory committee and we want to get them involved. And then draft regulations, as you heard from Ryan, are going to, we're going to start that with the stakeholders this summer with a board meeting potentially fall, September of 2016. So the goal is to implement these new, more sustainable, effective fee regulations by 2017, either January 1st or July 1st. And this is, as I said, the beginning of the conversation, so there's always opportunity to talk to us about what your ideas are. So I think what we'll do right now is we'll just open it up to some comments in the room, which we don't have very many folks. And then after we finish in the room, we'll move to your email questions. And I believe we're emailing it to elapcalifornia@waterboards.ca.gov. So let's turn it over to anyone in the room that has questions. Oh, before I move on, we had a ELAP fees listening session last Thursday in LA, and there was an idea that was discussed previously about 10 years ago that there would be a base fee that would cover the operating expenses and equipment, a field of accreditation fee, which is to cover all the on-site assessment and administrative costs, and then a unit of accreditation, which would cover our proficiency testing unit. So that's one idea that we had. And I believe a lot of the folks in the industry and ELAP's administration before really looked into this idea. So I'd like to put it out there again for everybody to think about. I just learned about it just yesterday or this morning, so I'm not too intelligent in the way of speaking of it, but I'm going to do some more research and then we can put it out there for all of you to think about. So I think that's it.
I have two questions. Chapter for other states.
Mm-hmm.
My first question is that when you're looking at the fee structure for other states, where do you see California is ranking wise? Is California charging a lot less or?
Well, I would, based on what we charge, I would say we're probably on the higher end, but we're the largest lab accreditation in the nation. We've got 700 labs. The second in line it's got 350. I don't know exactly who that is, but I know Florida has about 350. So, we've got a lot of staff, we've got a lot of labs to process certification and conduct on-site assessments, review PTs. We're embarking on planning, which is this initiatives, transformative initiatives that we're implementing and all the reforms that the expert panel recommended. So we're investing a lot of time there too. So we're doing a lot, and we're a big program.
Thank you. My second question is in regards with slide number 6, criteria for new structure. Is there a plan to include budget reporting for fee payers? How ELAP is spending the money with the payment that's being paid towards you. Essentially,
A report out on the
yes, a
budget.
report out.
Yeah, and I think that is something that we would do every year, correct, during the emergency regulation process. But also we would discuss these issues with LTAC, and we're being as transparent as possible. So whenever we can release information, I don't see why about our budget why we couldn't. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, some of our other programs are a little different in that we actually track hours that engineers and scientists are working in the field, and so it's easier to pull reports and show very detailed information. The state budget itself outlines, pretty clearly what's OE&E, and then you can also see all the staff costs. And then we can provide additional detail as far as, like, one of the things I forgot to mention when I was talking about the fee adjustments on an annual basis is ELAP fees haven't been adjusted for about 10 years until just recently. But the state, just like any other business, has its costs going up from year to year for employee health care and retirement and cost of living adjustments and whatnot. And so we would expect, in a more normal cycle, once we get through these big fee program whole, that we'd see a little more normal increase there. And those costs come from, like I said, employee compensation, benefits, and retirement. There's also something called pro rata here at the state, and it really is a fee that is charged to each state agency to cover costs of other state agencies that support, such as the Controller's Office, CHP for security, and others like that. And so that number gets determined by, I believe it's Department of Finance, and we have to pay that from on an annual basis. So those numbers and the detailed breakdown we can provide. It would be, I guess, important to find out from the lab community, what sort of numbers are you looking for an annual reporting, and then we could figure out how we can provide that. If it's not something we currently have, then maybe we have to look into something like we use for our drinking water program, where we have a time accounting system that every 1/10 of an hour is tracked for that each engineer works. They have to go in there and fill out their time, and that has a cost to it as well when you think about it. We have to build and maintain that database, and then you also employee time to actually write that stuff down and put it in. But if that's something that's necessary for the program, because some of our other programs have grant funding and whatnot, so we have to show what we're doing to the federal government and others. But we can definitely do our best to provide any information you guys are looking for.
So one thing I want to note is that we will be part of the Office of Research Planning and Performance's annual performance report. So that is going to keep track and keep us accountable for what we're doing, where we're spending our time, what we promise to do. So that will help in the picture of what we're doing in addition to what Ryan is talking about.
And I know we got a question. We were down in LA when they were trying to think about a base fee versus some sort of variable fee for methods or instruments and other things they brought up. In determining the base fee, they were saying, well, really, what is your overhead cost and your administrative costs versus the time for people that are actually out there working in the field certifying the labs? And that's something that we can look into to try to come up with some sort of scale on what that is. I don't currently know it off the top of my head, but I'm sure our accounting office to a certain degree tracks some of those overhead costs, and we could look into that.
anything other than what revenue you need and what the shortfall is, any additional information I think would help the laboratory community as a whole to have a better understanding on why ELAP fees are going to be increased. Especially if the bill get passed, we will not go through the same process of stakeholder participation. You're just, if you need certain percent to increase or decrease, you have that through emergency regulation. There will be no stakeholder participation in the future. Once the fee structure is firmed up and the current fee increase that you're talking about, that's possibly happening this year. So
I do want to mention, though, that ELAP right now is kind of a moving target because we're implementing a lot of reforms. And so, we're accepting other AB certificates. We're going to figure out what our lab standards are. We're implementing our own accreditation management system standards. So it's moving right now. So we need to just consider that. We'll definitely open whatever books we need for you all to know what our budget consists of. But, I have to express that a lot of time is being spent on the side of planning. So research, development, and planning to get these reforms in place.
Especially if we don't even know what exactly standards we're going to be following.
Yeah. So that's just
we
something
understand
to
that.
consider.
It's just the moving forward, knowing how the money is being spent.
Yeah.
It's always an information that laboratory community are very interested in knowing. We know we're going to pay, but we just wanted to know what is that money being used for.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, like I said, besides operating expenses and equipment and the overhead, is employee costs. So, and we could very easily put together a spreadsheet that shows all the different classifications that work in ELAP and what their salaries are budgeted for.
Yeah, we have to think ahead, like down the line, the vision for the program. We know that some things are stable. We know we're going to review PTs. We know we're going to do on-site assessment. We know we're going to do inspect, monitor, certify, enforce. Those are the functions. So, the numbers may not be indicative of what we want in the future. So we have to think about sustainable. What is it going to look like in the future? So, you may want numbers now and say we're spending a lot of money administratively, so then our base fee should be up, but that may not be the case in the future. So we have to look down the road at the program as a whole in the future. And that's what the structure should look like.
I don't have any questions from internet land out there, but if anyone has a comment or a question that they'd like to send in, please email it to elapca@waterboards.ca.gov.
Mm-hmm.
After the first year, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Proposals, then
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's clear to you.
So one comment is made that, we could do a reset next year, correct?
Correct.
So if we decide on a structure now and we bring it to the board in September, we can hit that reset button and think about what the structure could be, again, if it doesn't work for us. So that's one comment that, in fact, I want to introduce Cindy Forbes. She's the Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water, and I'm glad that she's here to give her support for ELAP. So as a comment. Any questions? No? Okay.
I was just wondering, is there any thought in this process about, we have somebody that audits our lab, that's what we're talking about. Who looks at the reports? Is there any certification process, is there any review process that goes on with reports that labs submit to the water board? Are those ever reviewed? Is that part of this fee structure, or is that totally separate?
That's totally
issue?
separate. So that's the data users. So we're in the business to certify labs to ensure that they're capable of running a method, that they have known and documented quality data for the regulatory agencies to use that data, and that's the reports you're talking about. So that's the responsibility of the agencies to review those reports. We're just making sure that the reports that come out of the lab is quality, is of known and documented quality, and they're proficient in the method.
Thank you.
I do have one question. This is from Kim Spear from Roseville, and I think I'll pitch this to Ryan. Once ELAP program and fee structure are in place, do you expect the revenue to change dramatically annually? If you're authorized to raise the fee annually, where's the incentive for efficiency to keep the cost controlled? This seems like a blank check.
Well, the caveat to that would be if unless there was a need for a change in the level of service, that the state process for any program, agency, et cetera, to grow in size, the process for that is called the BCP process, Budget Change Proposal, and it's something that goes through Department of Finance and gets vetted through DOF. And we don't have the authority on our own as a blank check to say, we want 20 new positions, so we're going to add that and we're going to make the fee payers pay it. We can put in a request and it goes through a review process. But if there were changes to legislation from the governor, the legislator that said, hey, we are going to add this program as part of ELAP and it's going to cost X amount of dollars, then, and if it was going to be fee supported, then we're going to give you general fund to go along with it, we would have to look at increasing fees. But on an ongoing basis, typically the expectation is just normal cost of doing business for healthcare, pro rata, employee comp. And I think when you look historically at the ELAP fund, I don't recall seeing any huge swings in there, but it's only been here at the board for a couple of years.
We do have 4 vacancies right now that we'd like to fill, which is causing...
And those are already budgeted
yeah,
for.
those are already budgeted.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that you've already made the selection of LTAC members. Are they posted?
Yes. They
All
were
right,
just
posted in the website.
Probably
ELAP
within the
website.
last half an hour.
Half an hour. Yes, because I was looking for it earlier. And then lastly, I heard that there's a typo error in the work plan as far as the rollout new fees invoices of July 2017 and not July 2016. True?
Yes, correct. Yeah, because if you look at the expert panel review report, it said 1 year. They gave us 1 year to revise our fee structure. So that if you technically take November, the report was released late October, November, it should be November 2017. So that's accelerated, and that was an error.
And if I could just add to that, so we have implementation, as you saw on the slide, on our next steps. We have implementation in 2017, and we have either January 1st or July 1st. And as far as initial feedback, what we're getting so far is that July 1st is a lot better for the municipal labs that are among our stakeholders. So we're kind of leaning that way at this point too, but it's absolutely still on the table and open for discussion. I have another question also. This is from Mark from Napa Sanitation. He says, considering the options of potential standards, are we considering the funding implications of the prospective standards?
So based on the new standards that we're going to implement, are we thinking about the future cost implications to the program? Yes. With any new standard or new permit requirement, it's going to require any agency to do some outreach and education. So as I mentioned before, the Planning, Research, and Development Unit will be engaging in a very extensive outreach and education effort for the new standards. So that will be a lot of time spent in the administrative side that is necessary. We don't want to implement any type of standards or any type of requirement without doing some outreach and education. Meaningful, in-depth outreach and education. So I think that's it. So if you have any questions, just email it to either myself or to ELAP California, or you can give me a call. And you can find all that information on our webpage, waterboards.ca.gov /ELAP. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.